To the people of Bitter Creek, the mark on Hattie Whittaker's face made her the devil's daughter, a sight that caused grown men to avert their gaze. But the true horror came in the winter of 1884, when her own father committed the unthinkable. He traded her to a terrifying, silent mountain man to settle a gambling debt. Hattie believed she was being marched toward her death, never suspecting she was actually being sent to the only man who would ever truly see her. This isn't a fairy tale. It is the gritty, heartbreaking, true story of Silas Kincaid and the woman he loved more than life itself. Buckle up. This story has a twist you won't see coming. The year was 1884, and the town of Bitter Creek, Wyoming, was a place where hope went to die, usually of thirst or a bullet wound. For Hattie Whittaker, hope had died the day she was born. She came into the world with a port wine stain, a deep, violet birthmark that swallowed the left side of her face, running from her hairline down to her jaw, encasing her eye in a perpetual shadow. In a superstitious town, they whispered. In a cruel household, they shouted. Her father, Obadiah Whittaker, was a man whose soul was as dry as the whiskey bottles that littered the porch of their failing homestead. He was a widower who blamed Hattie's face for his wife's death in childbirth, and he favored Hattie's younger sister, Louisa. Louisa was golden-haired, porcelain-skinned, and rotten to the core, a vanity fed by her father's doting. It was a Tuesday in late October when the devil came to collect, or at least that's what Hattie thought. She was scrubbing the floorboards, her good side turned towards the door. Her black hair hung low like a curtain to hide the mark. She heard the heavy thud of hooves, not a town horse, but something heavy, perhaps a Clydesdale cross. Then came the boots, heavy, deliberate. They shook the dust from the porch planks. "Obadiah!" A voice boomed. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a rock slide. Hattie peeked through the window. Standing there was a man who looked like he had been carved out of the granite of the Teton Range. He wore a buffalo hide coat that added bulk to an already massive frame. A beard, dark and thick as tangled briar, hid most of his face, save for eyes that were the color of cold steel. This was Silas Kincaid. The townspeople spoke of Kincaid in hushed tones. They said he lived above the snow line, that he trapped grizzly bears with his bare hands, and that he had killed 3 men in Laramie for touching his horse. He was a mountain man, a relic of a wilder time, coming down only to trade furs and buy lead. Obadiah stumbled out, wiping grease from his mouth. "Kincaid, I didn't expect you till the snows fell." "Snow's coming early," Silas said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "And you're short on my money, Whittaker. $300 for the pelts you stored and let rot, plus the poker debt." Obadiah turned pale. He didn't have $3, let alone 300. He looked around wildly, his eyes landing on the window where Hattie was hiding. A cruel, desperate gleam entered his watery eyes. "I ain't got the cash, Silas. The crop failed. But I got labor." Silas stared at him, unimpressed. "I don't need a drunkard's labor." "Not me," Obadiah said, a slimy smile creeping onto his face. "My girl. She's strong, stronger than a mule. She cooks, she cleans, she chops wood. You need a woman up there in the high country. A wife." Silas remained silent, his gaze unreadable. "She ain't a looker," Obadiah rushed to add, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that Hattie could hear through the thin glass. "Got a mark on her. Ugly as sin, some say. No man here will take her, but she's obedient. Take her and wipe the debt." Hattie's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Please, God, no. Not him. Silas looked at the house. "Bring her out." "Hattie!" Obadiah roared. She didn't move until he roared again. Trembling, she opened the door. She kept her head down, her hair shielding the left side of her face. She stepped onto the porch, the wood rough under her bare feet. "Look at him, girl," Obadiah snapped. He reached out, grabbed her chin roughly, and forced her head up, sweeping the hair back to reveal the purple stain in the harsh afternoon sunlight. Hattie squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the gasp of disgust, waiting for the laughter. Silence. The wind whistled through the eaves. A crow cawed. Finally, Silas Kincaid spoke. "Pack your things." Hattie opened her eyes. Silas wasn't looking at her father. He was looking directly at her. His expression hadn't changed. No disgust. No pity. Just a terrifying, intense assessment. "She's yours," Silas asked Obadiah, not breaking eye contact with Hattie. "Take her. Debt paid?" "Debt paid," Silas grunted. He reached into his coat, pulled out a heavy leather pouch, and tossed it at Obadiah's feet. It clinked with the sound of gold. "That's for her trouble, not yours." Obadiah scrambled for the pouch like a dog. "You have 5 minutes," Silas told Hattie. She ran inside, her tears hot and stinging. She owned nothing: a spare dress, a comb with missing teeth, and a small, battered Bible her mother had left her. She stuffed them into a flour sack. As she passed Louisa in the hallway, her beautiful sister smirked. "Better you than me, Hattie. Beast goes with the beast." Hattie didn't say a word. She walked out, climbed onto the back of Silas's massive horse, and didn't look back as they rode toward the dark, looming mountains. She was 20 years old, and she was certain her life was over. The journey up the mountain was a brutal awakening. They rode for hours in silence, the air growing thinner and colder with every mile. The landscape shifted from the dusty browns of Bitter Creek to the deep, imposing greens of pine and spruce. Hattie sat behind Silas, her arms wrapped tentatively around his waist to keep from falling. His buffalo coat smelled of wood smoke, pine resin, and old leather. Underneath, his body felt like iron. He didn't speak to her. He didn't check on her. He simply rode, a part of the wilderness itself. She expected cruelty. Men who bought wives were not known for their kindness. She imagined he would beat her if she burned the stew, or worse, he would mock her face, just like her father did. She prepared herself to be a slave. By nightfall, the temperature had plummeted. They made camp by a rushing glacial stream. Hattie scrambled off the horse, her legs numb. She immediately began gathering kindling, her hands shaking. "Stop!" Silas said. Hattie froze, dropping a stick. She flinched, waiting for the yell. Silas walked over to her. He loomed over her, blocking out the starlight. He reached out a gloved hand. Hattie squeezed her eyes shut. He adjusted the collar of her thin woolen coat, pulling it tighter around her neck. "You'll freeze before you find enough dry wood," he said, his voice surprisingly soft for such a large man. "Sit by the rock. I'll do it." Hattie sat, stunned, watching him. He moved with an efficiency she had never seen. Within minutes, a fire was roaring. He set a cast-iron pan over it and fried thick strips of venison and beans. When he handed her a tin plate, she hesitated. "Thank you, Mr. Kincaid." "Silas," he corrected. He sat across the fire from her, the flames illuminating his face. For the first time, she saw him clearly. He wasn't old, perhaps mid-30s. Under the beard, his jaw was strong. But it was his eyes that unsettled her. They tracked everything. The rustle of the brush, the movement of the horse, and her. "Why?" she whispered, the question escaping before she could stop it. He looked up. "Why what?" "Why did you take me?" "My father. He told you I'm marked." She gestured vaguely to her face, unable to touch it. Silas chewed his venison slowly. He took a swig from his canteen. "I needed a wife. You needed out of that house. But you could have had anyone. You have gold." "I don't want anyone," Silas said. "I want someone who knows what it's like to survive." He looked at her, his gaze lingering on the birthmark. "The pretty ones, like your sister. They wilt up here. The mountain breaks them. But you," he paused, "you've been broken already, Hattie. And you're still standing. That makes you dangerous. And that makes you useful." It wasn't a compliment exactly, but it was the first time anyone had ever acknowledged her strength rather than her flaw. They slept under the stars. Silas gave her the buffalo robe and slept in his coat, his back against a saddle. Hattie lay awake, watching the steam of her breath rise, wondering if she had been traded from one hell to another, or if she had just stepped into something entirely different. The next day, they reached his cabin. It wasn't the hovel she expected. It was a sturdy, 2-story structure made of massive logs, chinked with white clay. There was a wraparound porch, a smokehouse, and a barn. It sat in a high alpine meadow, surrounded by peaks that pierced the clouds. It was isolated, terrifyingly so, but it was beautiful. "This is it," Silas said, helping her down. "Home. Home." The word tasted strange on her tongue. As they walked to the door, Silas stopped. He turned to her, his face serious. "There is one rule here, Hattie. Only one." "Yes," she breathed. "We don't lie. Not to each other. The world down there is full of liars. Up here, a lie will get you killed. You tell me if you're hurt. You tell me if you're scared. You tell me if you want to leave. Understand?" I understand." "Good." He pushed the door open. The interior was warm, lit by the embers of a fire that had been banked days ago. It was clean, ordered, and masculine. But as Hattie looked around, she noticed something missing. There were no mirrors. Not one. No polished tin. No glass. She looked at Silas. He was hanging his coat. "I took them down," he said, his back to her. "Didn't think we needed them." Hattie touched her cheek. For the first time in 20 years, she was in a place where she wouldn't be forced to see the thing that made her a monster. The first month passed in a blur of routine. Hattie learned the rhythm of the mountain. She learned how to skin a rabbit, how to bank a fire so it lasted all night, and how to use the Winchester 73 that Silas kept above the mantel. Silas was a man of few words. He would leave before dawn to check his trap lines and return at dusk. He never raised a hand to her. He never shouted. He ate what she cooked, thanked her with a nod, and spent his evenings mending gear or reading by the fire. Yes, he read. That was the first twist. The savage mountain man had a shelf full of books, Shakespeare, Emerson, manuals on engineering. One evening in November, a heavy snow began to fall. The cabin felt smaller, the intimacy forced by the weather. Hattie was sewing a tear in his shirt. Silas was whittling a piece of pine. "You read well," Silas observed. He had seen her with her Bible. "My mother taught me before she passed," Hattie said. "She said a face like mine might keep me from a husband, but a mind would keep me from starvation." Silas stopped whittling. "Your mother was a wise woman. But she was wrong about the husband part." Hattie blushed, the heat rising up her neck. They were married in the eyes of the law. Obadiah had signed the paper. But they were strangers in the bedroom. Silas slept in a loft. She slept in the main bed. He hadn't touched her. "Silas," she asked, emboldened by the firelight, "why are you really up here? A man who reads Emerson doesn't hide on a mountain unless he's running from something." Silas looked into the fire. The shadows danced across his face, making him look older, wearier. "I lived in Boston once," he said quietly. Hattie dropped her needle. "Boston? I was an engineer. I built bridges. I had a wife, too. Eleanor." He said the name with a heavy finality. "She was beautiful," Silas continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Perfect by everyone's standards. But she was hollow when I got into trouble, when the company collapsed, and they tried to pin the fraud on me. She didn't stand by me. She testified against me to save her own social standing. I lost everything. My name, my freedom for a time, and my faith in pretty things." He looked at Hattie. "I came west to find something real. The mountain doesn't lie. It kills you or it keeps you. But it doesn't deceive you." He stood up and walked over to her. Hattie froze. He reached out and took the shirt from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. His skin was rough, calloused, but warm. "You're not ugly, Hattie," he said, his voice rough. You're the most real thing I've seen in 10 years. He reached out and, for the first time, touched her face, not the clear side. He laid his large palm over the birthmark. His thumb traced the edge of the purple stain near her eye. Hattie trembled, tears leaking from her eyes. "Don't, it's hideous." "No," he whispered. "It's just a mark. It's just skin." He leaned in. Hattie stopped breathing. She expected him to pull away at the last second. Instead, he kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was hungry, possessive, and overwhelming. He kissed her like a drowning man finding air. And for the first time in her life, Hattie didn't feel like a monster. She felt like a woman. That night, he didn't go to the loft. But happiness in the Wild West is a fragile thing, brittle as winter ice. 2 weeks later, while Hattie was fetching water from the creek, breaking the thin layer of ice with a bucket, she saw a reflection. Not her own. Behind her, on the ridge, sat a rider. He was dressed in a long duster coat, holding a rifle. He wasn't Silas. Hattie spun around, dropping the bucket. The man smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. He had a gold tooth that glinted in the winter sun. "Mrs. Kincaid, I presume?" the man called out. "Who are you?" Hattie shouted, her hand going to the knife Silas had insisted she carry. "Name's Caleb Rane," the man said, tipping his hat. "I'm an old friend of your husband's from Boston, and I've come a very long way to settle a score." He whistled, and 3 more riders appeared on the ridgeline. Hattie ran. She scrambled up the snowy bank towards the cabin, her breath tearing at her throat. "Silas! Silas!" But Silas was miles away, checking the north ridge. She was alone. Hattie hit the heavy oak door with her shoulder, stumbling inside the cabin. She slammed it shut, throwing the iron deadbolt with trembling hands just as the first heavy boot hit the wood from the outside. "Open up, darling." Caleb Rane's voice was muffled but sickeningly cheerful. "We just want to chat about your husband's retirement plans." Hattie didn't answer. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to seize her chest, but she forced it down. "Silas isn't here. You are." She remembered his voice. "The mountain doesn't lie. It kills you or it keeps you." She ran to the mantel and pulled down the heavy Winchester 73. The metal was cold against her sweating palms. She grabbed the box of brass cartridges. Silas had taught her to load, aim, and fire. "Breathe out," he'd said. "Squeeze, don't pull." Outside, the taunts turned nastier. "Come on out, ugly," another voice sneered. "We heard old Silas married a spook to keep the bears away. Let's see the face that stopped a clock." Hattie's jaw tightened. A month ago, those words would have crushed her. Now, with the weight of the rifle in her hands and the warmth of Silas's home around her, they just made her angry. A heavy weight slammed against the door. Wood groaned. They were using a log as a battering ram. Hattie moved to the window nearest the door, sliding the shutter open just an inch. She saw them, 4 men in heavy coats, their horses tied near the barn. 2 were swinging a felled pine log towards the door. Caleb Rane sat on his horse, smoking a cigar, watching with amusement. She rested the barrel of the Winchester on the sill. She didn't aim for the men. Not yet. She aimed for the dirt right in front of the lead man's boots. Crack! The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, the sound deafening in the small cabin. Outside, the man dropped his end of the log with a yelp as snow and frozen earth sprayed his legs. "Son of a bitch!" Caleb roared, his cigar falling from his mouth. "The bitch bites!" "Leave this place!" Hattie screamed, her voice raw. "The next one won't hit the dirt!" Silence fell outside for a moment. Then Caleb laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Well now, that's not very hospitable, Mrs. Kincaid. Boys, it seems we have to do this the hard way. Burn it down." Hattie's blood ran cold. Fire was death in the winter. One of the men lit a torch from a saddlebag. He started toward the porch steps. Hattie didn't hesitate this time. She remembered the feeling of Silas's hand on her face, the way he looked at her, like she was real. This was her home. This was where she became human. She shifted her aim. She inhaled, exhaled, and squeezed. The Winchester barked again. The man with the torch spun violently, clutching his thigh. He screamed, dropping the torch into the snow, where it hissed and died. "Damn it, rush the door! Rush it!" Caleb commanded, pulling his own revolver. Bullets began to thud into the thick logs of the cabin. Splinters sprayed inward. Hattie ducked below the window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She chambered another round with a metallic clack, clack. They hit the door again, harder this time. The top hinge groaned. A hairline crack appeared in the thick wood. Hattie scrambled backward towards the kitchen area, keeping the rifle trained on the door. She was hopelessly outnumbered. Silas wouldn't be back for hours. The door splintered inward with a crash. 2 men tumbled into the room, pistols drawn. Hattie fired blindly into the dust and confusion. She heard a grunt, but before she could lever the rifle again, a heavy weight slammed into her side, knocking the wind out of her. She hit the floor hard, the rifle skittering away. A boot pressed down on her wrist, crushing it against the floorboards. She looked up into the cold, gold-toothed smile of Caleb Rane. My, he drawled, looking down at her. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the birthmark, covering the left half of her face, now stark against her pale skin. Silas really did scrape the bottom of the barrel, didn't he? "You are a frightful thing." Hattie spat in his face. Caleb wiped the spittle away slowly, his smile vanishing. He leaned down and grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. "Grab her," he ordered the others. "We're taking her. Leave a message for Kincaid. Let him know his past has come calling." Silas Kincaid smelled the trouble before he saw it. The wind shifted as he crested the final ridge on his way home, carrying the acrid scent of spent gunpowder and something else. Something metallic. Blood. His chest tightened. He urged his massive horse into a gallop, the beast churning through the knee-deep snow. When he rode into the clearing, his world stopped. The cabin door was hanging off its hinges. The snow on the porch was trampled into a muddy mess of hoofprints and boot marks. Near the stairs, there was a bright crimson stain soaking into the white snow. "Hattie!" His shout echoed off the granite peaks, answered only by the wind. He dismounted before the horse fully stopped, hitting the ground running. He burst through the broken doorway, his Colt Navy revolver drawn. The cabin was wrecked. Furniture was overturned. Hattie's sewing basket was spilled across the floor, spools of thread unwinding like colourful veins. The Winchester lay near the fireplace, discharged, but no Hattie, no body. Silas holstered his gun and knelt by the fireplace. The ashes were cold. He moved to the centre of the room, dropping to one knee to examine the floorboards. He saw the scuff marks of a struggle. He saw a smaller boot print near the door, Hattie's. Then he saw it. Pinned to the mantelpiece with a hunting knife was a single playing card, the Ace of Spades. Silas pulled the knife free. The card was a message from a life he thought he had buried 10 feet deep in Boston. Caleb Rane, the man with the golden tooth and the soul of a viper. Silas stood up. A terrible, cold calm settled over him. This wasn't the rage of a man who had lost money. This was the primal, glacial fury of a creature whose territory had been breached and whose mate had been taken. He went to the root cellar and pulled out a hidden lockbox. Inside were things he hadn't touched in years, a pair of high-powered binoculars, a sleek Remington rolling block rifle meant for long-range killing, and a small tin-type photograph of a woman with perfect blonde hair. He looked at the photo of Eleanor, his first wife, the woman who had sold him out for social standing. He crumpled the tin picture in his massive hand and threw it into the cold fireplace. He didn't need memories of pretty liars. He needed the woman with the purple stain on her face, the woman who didn't flinch when he touched her, the woman who had defended his home until they dragged her out. He walked out into the twilight. The snow had started again, threatening to cover the tracks. But Silas didn't need tracks. He knew where men like Caleb Rane went when they wanted to feel safe. Down the mountain, toward the mining camps where they could drink and boast. He mounted his horse. He didn't look like an engineer from Boston anymore. He looked like the mountain itself, hard, unforgiving, and coming down to crush anything in its path. Hattie sat against the rough, splintered wood of the wagon wheel, the cold earth of the canyon floor seeping through her thin skirts. Her wrists were bound so tightly with hemp rope that her hands had gone numb, but the pain in her shoulders was sharp and biting. Every breath she took misted in the freezing air, a small, vanishing testament to the fact that she was still alive. She was 10 miles from the only home she had ever known. Not the wretched shack of her father in Bitter Creek, but the cabin in the high meadow. The cabin she had defended. The cabin where she had become a woman. Now, she was a captive in a shallow box canyon, the towering walls of granite pressing in on them, blocking out the moonlight and leaving them in a pool of inky darkness. The only light came from the campfire that crackled in the center of the clearing. It cast long, dancing shadows against the canyon walls, shadows that looked like grasping fingers. Around the fire sat her captors. There were 4 of them left. Caleb Rane, the man with the gold tooth and the eyes of a snake, sat on a log, nursing a tin cup of whiskey. He wore a long duster coat that looked expensive, but out of place in the rugged terrain. He didn't look like a mountain man. He looked like a predator from the city, a wolf in a silk vest. To his right sat Jed, the man Hattie had shot. He was pale, sweating profusely despite the cold, his leg wrapped in a blood-soaked rag. He moaned softly every time he shifted his weight. "Shut your mouth, Jed," Caleb snapped, not looking up from the fire. "You're attracting the coyotes. It hurts, Caleb," Jed whined, his voice thin. "She shot me. The bitch shot me." Caleb laughed, a dry, rattling sound that made Hattie's skin crawl. He stood up and walked over to where she was tied. He loomed over her, the firelight catching the gold in his mouth as he grinned. "You hear that, Mrs. Kincaid? You've made quite an impression on my boys. They didn't think you had it in you." Hattie looked up at him, refusing to cower. Her face throbbed where he had struck her earlier, a bruise blossoming across her cheekbone, dangerously close to her birthmark. "My husband will kill you," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. Caleb's smile faltered, then vanished. He crouched down, bringing his face inches from hers. He smelled of stale tobacco, expensive whiskey, and cruelty. "Your husband," Caleb sneered, "is a ghost, a phantom. He thinks he can hide up here in the clouds, playing the noble savage. But I know who he really is, and tonight, so will you." He reached out and grabbed a handful of her hair, forcing her head back. Hattie gasped, but didn't scream. "You think he's a hero, don't you? The big, strong mountain man who saved you from your daddy. The beast who rescued Beauty." Caleb chuckled darkly. "Let me tell you a bedtime story, Hattie. A true story about a man named Silas Kincaid." Hattie tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. "I don't want to hear your lies." "Oh, these aren't lies, darling. This is history. Back in Boston, Silas wasn't trapping bears. He was an engineer. We were partners, he and I. Kincaid and Rane Construction. We were going to build the future." Caleb let go of her hair and stood up, pacing back and forth in front of her like a lawyer addressing a jury. "We won the contract for the Charles River Bridge. It was the biggest job in the state. Fame, fortune, social standing. It was all right there. But there was a problem. The budget was tight. Too tight. We were going to lose money if we did it by the book." He stopped pacing and looked at Hattie. "Silas. He was the genius. He figured out the math. He realized we could use a lower grade of steel for the suspension struts. He said no one would notice. He said the safety margins were too high anyway. He convinced me to sign off on it. We saved $50,000. We split it." Hattie felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "No," she whispered. "Silas wouldn't." "Wouldn't he?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. The bridge opened in November. A week later, a winter storm hit. Not even a bad one. Just enough ice to weigh down the cables. He paused for effect, leaning in close again. It snapped, Hattie. The whole damn thing folded like a house of cards. At rush hour, a carriage carrying a family, mother, father, 3 little girls, went straight into the freezing water, along with a dozen others. 30 people died that day, drowned in the dark. Hattie stared at him, horror washing over her. She thought of Silas reading Emerson by the fire. She thought of his gentle hands. She thought of the sadness in his eyes that never truly went away. Was this why? The investigation started the next morning, Caleb continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But Silas, clever Silas, he saw it coming. The night before the subpoenas were issued, he raided the office. He took the cash, our cash. And he took the blueprints, the original ones, with his notes on the steel grades. The only proof that it was his idea, not mine. Caleb's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He vanished, left me holding the bag. I spent 5 years in a federal prison because of him. I lost my wife, my home, my name. While he came out here to play cowboy, he spat on the ground near her feet. He's not a savior, Hattie. He's a mass murderer. He killed those children for money. And then he used that blood money to buy you. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Hattie's mind raced. It made terrible sense. The gold pouch he had thrown at her father's feet, the way he avoided people, the way he spoke of the world of liars. Was he the biggest liar of them all? He doesn't have the blueprints, Hattie said, her voice trembling. He burned everything. He told me he burned his past. He didn't burn them, Caleb roared, making Hattie flinch. Those papers are his insurance. If he gets caught, he can try to pin it back on me. He wouldn't destroy them. He's too calculating for that. Caleb grabbed her shoulder, his fingers digging into her flesh. And you are going to help me get them back. When he comes, and he will come, you're going to scream for him. You're going to beg him to trade those papers for your life. Because if you don't... He pulled his revolver from its holster and slowly cocked the hammer. The metallic click was loud in the silence. If you don't, I'm going to let Jed and the boys have their fun with you, and then I'm going to put a bullet in your brain and leave you here for the wolves. Hattie looked into his eyes and saw that he meant it. He was a broken, desperate man, fueled by a decade of festering vengeance. He won't trade, Hattie said softly, if what you say is true. If he really is a monster, why would he care about me? I'm just an ugly thing he bought to chop wood. Caleb stared at her for a moment, and then a cruel smile spread across his face. That's the gamble, isn't it? Maybe he loves you. Maybe he just owns you. We're about to find out. He walked back to the fire and sat down, pouring himself another drink. The other men laughed nervously, casting glances at the darkness beyond the firelight. Hattie leaned her head back against the wagon wheel. She closed her eyes. She replayed every moment with Silas, the way he had defended her from her father, the way he had taught her to shoot, the way he had kissed her birthmark when no other man would even look at her. We don't lie, not to each other. She remembered the look in his eyes when he talked about Eleanor. She testified to save her own social standing. Caleb was slick. He was a talker. He was a man who wore a duster coat in the mountains and had soft hands. Silas had calluses. Silas built things that lasted, like their cabin. A realization hit her, piercing through the fear. Caleb's story had a hole in it. If Silas had stolen the money and the plans to escape justice, why did he live like a hermit? Why didn't he go to Mexico or Europe? Why did he punish himself with isolation? And the bridge? Silas checked every log in their cabin 3 times. He reinforced the roof when the snow got heavy. He was obsessed with integrity. A man like that didn't use cheap steel. A man like that didn't cut corners. He's lying, Hattie thought, her heart steadying. Caleb is the liar. Suddenly the horses tied on the picket line began to whinny. They stamped their feet. their eyes rolling white in the darkness. Caleb stood up instantly, his hand going to his gun. "Quiet!" he hissed at the men. The camp went silent. The wind died down. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity. "Is it a bear?" Jed whispered, reaching for his rifle. "No," Hattie said, her voice cutting through the silence. She looked at Caleb with defiance burning in her eyes. "It's Judgment Day." From the darkness, a sound emerged. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a gunshot. It was the rhythmic, heavy thud of a large rock being struck against a tree trunk. Thud, thud, thud. It was a slow, deliberate cadence, a heartbeat of violence approaching. Caleb spun around, aiming his pistol into the black void. "Show yourself, Kincaid! I know you're there!" The thudding stopped. "Check the perimeter," Caleb barked at the two uninjured men. "Go!" They hesitated, terrified of leaving the firelight. "I said go!" As the men stepped cautiously into the shadows, Hattie saw movement on the ridge above the camp. A silhouette against the stars, massive, silent. It wasn't a ghost. It was her husband, and he hadn't come to negotiate. The canyon was a tomb of silence, the kind that rings in your ears. The only sound was the crackle of the campfire, consuming the dry cedar logs Caleb's men had gathered. The flames threw long, erratic shadows against the limestone walls, shadows that seemed to twitch and reach out like grasping fingers. Hattie sat with her back to the wagon wheel, the rough bark digging into her spine. Her wrists, bound by the hemp rope, had lost all feeling hours ago, but her mind was razor-sharp. She watched the darkness beyond the ring of firelight. She didn't see him, but she felt him. The mountain had changed. The wind had shifted, carrying a scent that wasn't sage or pine. It was the scent of ozone and violence. "Stop pacing, Caleb," Jed hissed, clutching his bandaged leg. "You're making me nervous." "I'm making you nervous." Caleb Rane spun around, his duster coat flaring. His face was pale, the firelight catching the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the freezing temperature. "There is a madman in these woods, Jed. A man who knows this terrain better than you know your own mother's face." "He's just a bridge builder," the third man, a brute named Dutch, grunted, spitting tobacco into the fire. "He ain't a ghost. He bleeds like anyone else." As if in answer, a sound echoed from the ridge above them. It was the sharp, distinctive click of a rock striking rock. Dutch raised his rifle. "I see him! Up on the ledge!" He fired. The gunshot was a thunderclap in the enclosed space, blinding them all with the muzzle flash. "You fool!" Caleb screamed. "You've ruined your night vision!" Before the echo of the shot had died away, a shape detached itself not from the ledge above, but from the darkness of the scrub oak directly behind Dutch. Silas hadn't been on the ridge. He had thrown the rock to make them look up. Silas moved with terrifying speed for a man of his size. He didn't look like a man. In his heavy buffalo coat, he looked like a grizzly standing on its hind legs. He struck Dutch with the stock of his rifle, a savage, controlled blow to the back of the head. Dutch crumpled without a sound, his face hitting the dirt. "3!" a deep voice rumbled from the shadows. It wasn't a shout. It was a statement of inventory. "There! Behind the horses!" Caleb shrieked, spinning in a circle, his revolver shaking in his hand. The horses screamed and reared, tearing at their picket lines. In the confusion, Silas slipped under the belly of Caleb's roan mare. He emerged on the other side, right next to the fourth man, a hired gun named Sully. Sully turned, eyes wide, but he was too slow. Silas didn't shoot him. He grabbed Sully by the collar of his coat and the belt of his trousers and heaved him. Sully flew through the air, crashing into the supply wagon with a bone-jarring thud. He didn't get up. "2," the voice said again. Now it was just Caleb and the injured Jed. Caleb scrambled backward, tripping over his own boots. Panic had stripped away his city veneer, leaving a terrified, cornered rat. He lunged toward Hattie. "Don't come any closer." Caleb screamed into the dark. He grabbed a handful of Hattie's hair and yanked her up, jamming the barrel of his Colt Navy revolver against her temple. The cold steel made Hattie wince, but she didn't cry out. She looked straight ahead. "Show yourself, Kincaid, or I swear to God I'll paint this canyon with her brains." Silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Then the heavy crunch of boots on snow broke the quiet. Silas walked into the firelight. He held his rifle loosely in one hand, barrel pointed at the ground. His face was smeared with mud and pine resin, masking his features, but his eyes burned with a cold blue fire. He stopped 10 paces away. He didn't look at Caleb. He looked at Hattie. For a moment, the world narrowed down to just the two of them. In his eyes, she saw no judgment, no disgust at her captivity, only a fierce, terrifying resolve. "Let her go, Caleb," Silas said. His voice was calm, the low rumble of a river before it floods. "This is between you and me. It always was." "You ruined me!" Caleb's voice cracked, high and hysterical. 5 years, Silas. I rotted in a cell because of you. You stole the plans. You stole the money." "I stole the evidence you were going to burn," Silas corrected. He took a slow step forward. "I told you the carbon content in that steel was too low. I showed you the math. You didn't care about the bridge, Caleb. You cared about the bonus for finishing early. It was a business decision," Caleb yelled, pressing the gun harder against Hattie's head. "Calculated risk. But you righteous son of a bitch, you panicked. You took the blueprints that proved I signed off on the swap, and you ran." "I ran because you bought the judge, Caleb," Silas said, taking another step. "I knew I couldn't win in a Boston court against your father-in-law's money. So I took the only leverage I had, and I left. I didn't kill those people. You did." Hattie felt a jolt of electricity go through her spine. He was innocent. Every doubt Caleb had planted in her mind withered and died. Silas wasn't a monster who hid from his crimes. He was a man who had exiled himself to keep a terrible truth safe. "Give me the papers," Caleb demanded, his eyes darting around. "I know you have them. Hand them over, and maybe I let you both live." "They aren't here," Silas said. "They're in a safety deposit box in Cheyenne. I'll take you to them. But first, you let her walk to me." Caleb hesitated. Greed warred with fear in his eyes. The blueprints were his ticket back to society, his way to clear his name and blame everything on the phantom Silas Kincaid. "Walk," Caleb hissed at Hattie, shoving her forward but keeping his gun trained on her back. "Slowly. One wrong move, Kincaid, and she dies first." Hattie stumbled forward, her legs stiff. She was 5 feet away from Silas. She could see the tension in his jaw, the way his muscles were coiled like springs. She remembered the knife. When Silas had first brought her to the cabin, he had given her a small, bone-handled skinning knife. "Keep it in your boot," he had said. "The mountain is full of surprises." Caleb had tied her hands, but he hadn't checked her boots. She caught Silas's eye. He flicked his gaze down to her feet for a fraction of a second. He knew. "Now!" Silas roared. Hattie dropped. She didn't just fall. She threw herself flat onto the frozen earth. The instant she dropped, Silas moved. He didn't dive for cover. He dove over her. Caleb fired. Bang! The bullet whizzed through the space where Hattie's head had been a second before, tearing through the lapel of Silas's buffalo coat. Silas crashed into Caleb, a tidal wave of fur and fury. The two men hit the ground hard, rolling into the dust near the fire. The impact knocked the pistol from Caleb's hand. It wasn't a duel. It was a brawl. It was the raw, ugly violence of two men who had hated each other for a decade. Caleb clawed at Silas's face, his fingers raking over Silas's eyes, trying to gouge them out. He punched, kicked, and bit. But Silas didn't fight like a gentleman anymore. He fought like a bear. He absorbed Caleb's punches with a grunt, his massive weight pinning the smaller man to the ground. Silas raised a fist like a sledgehammer and brought it down. Crack! Caleb's nose shattered. He screamed, blood spraying across the snow. "That's for the bridge," Silas growled, landing another blow. Caleb flailed, his hand grasping for a burning log from the fire. He swung it, striking Silas across the side of the head. Sparks flew. Silas roared in pain, reeling back, half blinded by the ash and heat. Caleb scrambled to his feet, grabbing his fallen revolver from the dirt. He raised it, his face a mask of bloody, broken triumph. "Goodbye, partner!" Bang! The shot echoed through the canyon. Silas didn't fall. Caleb looked down. A red flower was blooming on his own chest. He looked up, confused. Hattie was sitting in the dirt, her wrists still bound, but her hands were clasped together around the small, bone-handled knife she had pulled from her boot. She hadn't thrown it. She hadn't stabbed him. Smoke was curling from the Winchester rifle lying on the ground near the wagon. Dutch's rifle. Hattie had scrambled to it, braced the stock against the ground because she couldn't shoulder it with bound hands, and pulled the trigger with her thumbs. Calabrane dropped to his knees. He looked at Hattie, his eyes widening as if seeing her for the first time. "You—" he wheezed. Then he fell face forward into the firelight and didn't move. Silence rushed back into the canyon, heavy and absolute. Silas stood swaying, blood running down the side of his face from the burn. He looked at Caleb's body. Then he looked at Hattie. He dropped to his knees and crawled to her. "Hattie!" he choked out. He pulled a knife from his belt and sliced the ropes binding her wrists. As soon as her hands were free, she didn't rub them to get the feeling back. She reached out and grabbed Silas's face, her bloodied fingers pressing into his beard. "You didn't kill them," she sobbed, the tears finally coming hot and fast. "You tried to save them." "I ran away," Silas whispered, his forehead resting against hers. He was shaking. This mountain of a man was trembling. "I left you alone to face him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "You came back," Hattie said fiercely. "You came back for me." Silas pulled back, his hands cupping her face. He looked at the birthmark, the purple stain that the world said made her unlovable. He ran his thumb over it, wiping away a smear of dirt. "I would burn the world down for you, Hattie," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are the only truth I have left. You are the only beautiful thing I have ever known." Hattie leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. For the first time in her life, the shadow over her face didn't feel like a curse. It felt like the place where his hand belonged. "Take me home, Silas," she whispered. "Take me up the mountain." They didn't stay in the canyon. They left Caleb and his men for the marshal in Laramie to find, along with the blueprint Silas finally retrieved from his lockbox, evidence that cleared his name and condemned Rane's memory to infamy. They returned to the high meadow. The winter was hard that year, the snow burying the cabin up to the windowsills, but the fire inside never went out. On Christmas morning, 3 weeks after the fight, Hattie woke up to the smell of coffee and pine. She walked into the main room. Silas was standing by the window, watching the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of gold and violet. On the wall, opposite the table, hung something that hadn't been there before. It was a mirror, a large, oval glass framed in polished walnut. Hattie froze. She hadn't looked at her own reflection in 20 years. Not really. She had only seen glimpses in water or darkened glass, always turning away in shame. Silas turned. He didn't say a word. He just watched her. Hattie walked towards the mirror, her heart hammered in her chest. She stepped in front of it. She saw the woman in the glass. She saw the dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She saw the scar on her lip from Caleb's strike. And she saw the birthmark. It was there, stark and purple, covering the left side of her face. But for the first time, she didn't look away. She saw something else. She saw strength. She saw eyes that had faced down a killer. She saw a mouth that had been kissed with passion. Silas walked up behind her. In the reflection, he towered over her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. He looked at her in the glass, his gaze locking with hers. "What do you see?" he asked softly. Hattie touched the cold glass. She traced the line of her jaw. "I see Hattie Kincaid," she said, her voice steady and proud. Silas smiled, and he leaned down. kissing her cheek, right on the mark. "I see the woman who saved my life," he whispered. "Silas and Hattie Kincaid never left that mountain. They lived there for another 40 years. Silas was eventually cleared of all charges, but he never went back to building bridges for cities. He said he had already built the only thing that mattered, a life with Hattie. They say love is blind, but I think Hattie and Silas proved that wrong. Love isn't blind. Love is the only thing that sees clearly. It sees past the scars, past the past, and straight into the soul. So, I want to hear from you. Do you think you could have forgiven Silas for keeping his secret? And what do you think is the biggest lie we tell ourselves about beauty? Let me know in the comments below. If Hattie's story moved you, please give this video a like. It helps us share these forgotten stories. And don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open.